Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from today. My name is Eric Kimberling with Third Stage Consulting Group. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients through their digital transformation journeys. And today we are going to talk about the top ERP systems for 2023. What are those ERP systems that are available to you? What are the strengths and weaknesses? Which one should you consider? What scenarios might certain systems be the best fit? All that good stuff we're going to talk about here in today's live stream. I'm going to introduce our guest in just a moment, but before I do, just a couple of logistical things. This is a part of our weekly live stream series that we host every Tuesday at this same time, same place, LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. So be sure to check us out every Tuesday. We have different topics and different guests every Tuesday we do this. So thank you for being here today. Also, if you could, we are going to jump in and dive into different ERP systems in the market here in just a moment. First, we're going to introduce our guest, but then we'll get into some of the leading ERP systems in the market. So we're going to try and cover as much as we can as far as what some of the strengths and weaknesses are of different types of enterprise technologies in the marketplace today, at least the major ones that you may have heard of in some of the leading systems in the market. And of course, I would love to hear I'd love to hear any questions that you all have, any comments or questions you have regarding the systems we talk about here today, or if you've got questions about other systems that we're not getting to, I'd love to hear your feedback as we go through the chat here today or through the conversation. So be sure to drop in the chat any questions or comments you have along the way, and Adam and I are going to be keeping an eye out for that here. We'll be watching the stream as we go here, and we'll cherry pick some of those questions for discussion here today. And then the last thing, last but not least, before I introduce our guest, if you could just drop in the chat where you're joining from today. What city and country are you in? We tend to reach a pretty global audience, so I'd love to see and hear where everyone's from here today. And certainly that might factor into our discussion as well, geographic considerations that you might want to consider as you go through digital transformations and as you go through a software evaluation process potentially here in 2023. So with us today is a repeat guest, a recurring guest on our live stream and on our podcast, Adam Cheatham, who is managing director at Third Stage Consulting at our corporate office in the U.S. Adam, thanks for being here again today.
Of course, glad to be on again.
Yeah, so you were first, just to get this out of the way, you were recently promoted at Third Stage. This is outside the scope of today's conversation, but it is worth mentioning before we jump in that you've recently been promoted. Maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I suckered this guy I work for into
Convincing him after 4 years.
no, so it's been an awesome journey at Third Stage over the last 4 years. We have had a lot of different conversations about how the company grows and what's an important part of creating that growth, and it's always been connected to addressing a need in the marketplace and identifying that. That's been a ton of fun to see because we get a chance to see a lot about what's happening in the world from a number of different points of view and different industries and those types of things. And as we've kind of grown as a company and started taking on different types of clients and different types of industries and different types of projects, just have really started as a company here at Third Stage. We've started to really thrive in the selection, PMO space, OCM spaces that have led to quite a lot of growth. And being a part of the organizational change that's been a part of that and leading some of it and inventing it along the way has been an exciting journey. So I'm looking forward to the next challenge here and looking at what it is we can do to be more in touch with what's going on around the world and what people need so that we can keep doing this thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, congratulations on the promotion, of course. And it's been a few weeks now, and you're still getting settled into the role, and it's a new role at our company, so we're still defining a lot of what it looks like. But I've worked with you previously to Third Stage for a couple of years at Panorama, and then now 4 years plus here at Third Stage. So over this time, you've sort of escalated in the organization and been a key part of the organization from the start. And you've got to see a lot of different software evaluations and selections. And more recently, in the last year or so, you've gotten more involved with some of our international clients and our international teams. So I think you're a perfect guest for this discussion because not only are you very senior within the organization, but you've had more, like a bigger purview of all the different project teams and geographies that we work. And so I think that'll be an interesting perspective as it relates to different ERP systems here in the market. Um, I guess just to start, what I was going to do today, I thought is I actually have an upcoming YouTube video that's going to get released probably 3 weeks from now, maybe 2 weeks from now, on my YouTube channel, and it's the top 10 most selected ERP systems. And so I've done a lot of top 10 rankings, based on company size and industry and all that kind of stuff. But this is the first time we've done a top 10 ranking of the systems that were most selected by our clients. And it was just an interesting exercise that you actually helped us compile, which was looking at over the last couple of years, what are those systems that we most commonly recommended and selected to different organizations throughout the world. And so I've got that list in front of me, and I was just going to kind of go through some of the vendors that show up on that list to get us started. And then, of course, if the audience has questions or wants to talk about certain technologies that we're not yet talking about, certainly would love to hear any suggestions or any suggested vendors you want us to cover, or if you've got questions about the vendors we are covering, please chime in with any comments there. So I'm going to not go down the list one by one, but I'm going to pick some of the bigger names, that they're maybe more commonly recognized to start. And why don't I start with one of the ones that landed in our top 5 was SAP S/4HANA, and SAP is the largest ERP software vendor in the marketplace. It's used by a lot of Fortune 500 companies, a lot of global companies. But maybe tell us maybe you could give us a couple examples or maybe general situations where SAP S/4HANA makes a lot of sense for an organization to consider.
Yeah, so I think that the first and foremost thing to recognize about S/4HANA is that it's a massive software system, right? So we're not talking about small, medium-sized businesses that tend to go for that. We're talking about big ones. Very often, larger than $500 million in highly complex industries. It takes a long time to implement, and it's highly complex. But I would actually say that it's one of the, if not the most mature software package in the modern industry right now. It's very close to it because it's the way that they've transitioned from the old ECC6 platform to the suite on HANA and the SAP S/4HANA stuff has been a more gradual transition as opposed to kind of the sharp, we're just going to recode it for the cloud conversation. I think that that's led to a lot of success for SAP and a lot of smoothness in that. SAP has a lot of brand recognition too. So you see a lot of companies that end up moving from ECC6 to S/4HANA and keeping that in house, especially with the way the teams have grown and around that platform. But I wouldn't say that there's any industry that it can't handle. It's just a matter of whether or not it's exactly the right fit for you, right? This doesn't mean that I'm not saying SAP S/4HANA is going to win every competition it's ever in. It's certainly lost a few, especially with the complexity of the implementation itself and the heaviness of the product. But I'd say that if you have the wherewithal, the complexity needs and requirements that SAP S/4HANA is certainly a valid consideration for your business.
Yeah. Yeah, and that HANA platform is pretty interesting too, just because it has that real time memory, and it's meant to provide higher performance to organizations because of the HANA platform, and it also gets them off the Oracle database stack, which it was always a little strange that SAP was such fierce competitors with Oracle, but yet at the same time they were a customer of Oracle by using their databases for some of the older versions of SAP, but now they've got this HANA platform that sort of replaces Oracle and also provides a whole new architecture for SAP, which is pretty interesting.
Well, if Amazon ever decides to enter the ERP space, a lot of companies are in trouble in the same way.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I never thought of that, but that with AWS and Amazon Web Services, it doesn't seem that far-fetched actually for Amazon to potentially provide systems in the future. What about, one thing that's interesting about SAP as well while we're talking about it is, I know back in the day, 10, 20 years ago, SAP was sort of known for developing its own integrated system. It's sort of like its own greenfield system that they developed on their own. But in more recent years, in the last decade, they've gone out and acquired different companies like Ariba and SuccessFactors for the human capital management, Concur for time and expense reporting, business objects. So they've acquired all these different companies, and they're sort of creating this pseudo best of breed model, almost like what Oracle was doing 10 or 20 years ago. So
Mhm.
what are your thoughts on that? Do you see that affecting either the evaluation of SAP and or the implementation of SAP? Does it change anything in your mind just in the last few years?
I would say that I'd like to see that become a bit more mature. Everybody that I've seen try to tie those together still has a lot of there's still a bit of growing pains in that they feel like they're integrating different different software systems, even though the logo is the same. I think it's certainly an interesting tactic, given that the overall approach to solving some of the more niche based needs is being addressed, especially as you see a lot of other software packages in the industry not be such as a mature package. I'm a big believer of the idea that it took a long time to build the older systems, right? 30 years of development doesn't go away in those systems, but it doesn't get migrated overnight to the cloud either. And so when you start talking about most other systems, you end up with a best of breed challenge to serve more niche based needs. So kind of picking off some of those things that are the low hanging fruit and buying them up, I think is a really smart strategic move.
Yeah, yeah, and they also provide options too. If their module can't handle a certain function the way that a customer might want it to, they've got these options with Reba and Success Factors. One thing
Yeah.
that I find interesting, I don't know if you've seen this or not, but one thing I find interesting though in the market with SAP customers is it seems like there's not a lot of thought that goes into like which systems are we actually getting or do we need. It seems like a lot of the big system integrators and SAP as a company tends to position this whole package solution that includes um, Ariba and Success Factors and Concur and all these edge solutions. I don't know if you've seen that as well, but it seems like a lot of companies are just over investing in the technology stack in some ways because a lot of them don't use all that capability.
Yeah. And I think that the Epicor is doing something similar as well, where they're kind of buying up a lot of little things here and there, where they're filling a lot of different types of technology gaps, especially as it pertains to things like automation and stuff like that. So I think that it's the fastest way to fill the gaps in the software package that you don't have already developed, right? That you take that maturity model that used to be and you rebuild something, and then you have holes. Right now you can buy things to fill those holes with more modern technology that somebody else has already done all the legwork. So I think that's a pretty common approach right now, and I think we're probably going to see a lot more with it. It's interesting that you bring it up that way. I'd be curious as to what you're seeing as well, since you've got some of the more exposure to the whole industry at a different level than I do.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're still working on making an integrated solution. And I think even in some cases, the system integrators and implementation partners don't fully understand in which situations do I need, for example, success factors versus just the core HCM module or, do I really need that additional module? One
Mhm.
comment though that I think is worth sharing that is kind of funny, or I think it's very funny, is from Frederick on LinkedIn. It just came in, and he said SAP is integrated on your invoice, which is pretty funny. Um, but it's true. It is going to be an integrated solution that you're going to pay for on one invoice. Whether or not it's integrated as technology, I suppose, is a different story. So thanks for keeping us lighthearted here on a Tuesday, Frederick. I appreciate that. Um, I want to come back to maybe a couple other vendors as well in a moment, but I want to turn to the audience real quick because we've had a lot of good comments here, a lot of at least a mention of where people are joining from today. We have people from all over the world. We have people from Denver, Colorado, which is where I'm based. Adam's not too far
Mhm.
from Denver. He's in Grand Junction, Colorado, on the western slopes of Colorado. Frederick from Norway, Yuri from Frankfurt, Germany, Avanaden from Poland. I'm sorry if I butchered your name, which it's highly likely I just did. Um, got someone from Newcastle, UK, Mexico with operations in the US, Ecuador. Um, a lot of good participation here. So thanks everyone for joining from all over the world here today, and then someone from Canada. I want to get to a question. It might. There's part of me that argues this might disrupt our flow a little bit, but I think it's a really good question that I think it's worth getting to here. And I'm just trying to find it because it came in early. Oh, here it is. So this question is a great one. This is from Hamid on LinkedIn. He says, "Hi Eric, what about developing its own ERP? Is this avenue still relevant? In which cases? Any examples?" And Hamid is joining from Canada. So, what are your thoughts on custom development, custom solutions? Is that ever a good idea when you've got these commercial off the shelf options available to you?
Well, custom solution is always an option, right? And it generally is often more an option when you're talking about a system that you're trying to maintain and get as much as you can out of it. Now, I would say that the biggest challenge with the custom solution and building your own is the security component of it. That's the hardest part because these larger companies, the larger you are, the more at risk you are. The more antiquated your system, the more at risk you are. So when you started to talk custom development, you have quite a lot of challenges with making sure that you have your cybersecurity ducks in a row. That would be my biggest worry. At the end of the day, being one step faster than the guy behind you does certainly save you from an animal attack.
Right.
And it's similar in the ERP space, right? So the people target the weakest links from a perspective of cybersecurity. And if you're talking about a custom coded environment, that makes you a target on your own. At the end of the day, it's always an option to consider in growing your own environment. You just had to make sure that you're taking on those risks yourself. Whereas when you look at some of those top 10 vendors in the industry, those risks are handled for you, especially in a cloud environment where you have more of the advantage of the whole. So that if that company is now responsible for everybody on a multi-tenant platform, and there's one in and one out, right? So it's just a more consolidated approach to defense, but
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to custom code your own software. I've worked with companies, for example, that have coded and implemented um, their own iterations of Microsoft Dynamics Business Central, for example. There are software packages where you can get the best of both worlds, where you can have your hand on the wheel and have a modern ERP. Odoo is another great example from a perspective of having an open source platform that you really get an opportunity to build on your own. Again, you do take a lot more responsibility for that, but at the same time, on the flip side, you have the advantage of having all of those things in house, so not having
Yeah.
to pay those external costs.
Yeah, you bring up a great point about, well, first of all, I think it's worth having an open mind, as you mentioned, as far as not totally ruling out custom development, because it's probably pretty unlikely that an organization is going to benefit from its own entire enterprise-wide custom solution, just because there's so many solutions out there that can handle sort of at least the core of what you need,
Mhm.
unless you're in a super unique business, super unique industry. You have a highly sophisticated IT staff. You really are investing heavily in IT as a competitive advantage. Then, of course, there might be some rare instances like that where a custom developed solution might make sense. But you bring us a really good point about other options as far as sort of best of both worlds. When you have like a Microsoft Dynamics, where it's not only is it a little bit more customizable than other solutions, but you also have these third party ISV providers that are providing industry focused or sort of variations of the core software that are meant to fit certain solutions or certain scenarios. So maybe talk a little bit about, you mentioned Microsoft E365 and also Odoo. I think those are two good examples of systems that give you that additional flexibility. What are some of the pros and cons of, say, a Microsoft or Odoo, which both, by the way, Microsoft rated very high. It was in our top 3 most recommended systems. And then Odoo was sort of at the lower part of our top 10 list of most recommended systems across
Yeah.
the.
So I'd say that we'll start with Odoo. That tends to be the trendier thought. We get a lot of folks that are on the more on the bleeding edge of technology to want to know about Odoo. How could this work for us? And at the end of the day, the software system can be made to do anything you can make it do. That's the challenge, right? Do you have that expertise? Are you willing to take that on in house? And that becomes the conversation on it. We had one of the times that we recommended Odoo, for example, was with a client whose product was very technically based. It's a a registry-based product that has a lot of technology and algorithms and things behind it. So their focus is on software. So their skill sets in-house are all built around that. They don't hire people that can't handle software. So when you think about maintaining your own system and creating an integration with a technical product that's software based, you have a skill set to tap into, and so that there's less of a risk to your business model if you already have that in house. And that's really something that is generally one of the first early questions I ask folks who are into Odoo and looking at it is, can you handle this weight? It's
Yeah.
especially for smaller companies. It's a similar question for SAP, for example. We talked about that earlier. Can you handle this weight? And if the answer is no, then you need to be honest with yourself on that, and get something where you can have a partner that can do that, which is on the flip side from a Microsoft perspective. You have that conversation of it can do a lot of things, and I think that part of the reason Microsoft ends up rated so highly on our list is that they have a couple of different products that in the Microsoft Dynamics suite. That you have Business Central, which is more the smaller business side of things, and you have Finance and Supply Chain, which is the larger tier one product. They're heavy implementations, they're big challenges, but you can have a lot more control over it. It's intended to be that way, where there's a flip side of every coin, right? With Microsoft Dynamics, the functionality is pretty wide ranging, and it can do a lot of things if you can build it that way, or you have a partner that can build it that way for you, which is a difference from an open source versus a more highly configurable platform like Microsoft. So we see Microsoft work really well for folks that want to have a little bit more tinkering. I see some folks in here talking a little bit about NetSuite and things like that competes very well against both those products. The difference there is that NetSuite has a lot of functionality, but it's built a very specific way. And so you have quite a bit less functionality tweaking that you're able to do. But at the same time, you have a critical mass of clients that allows for enhancements to the product itself. So instead of saying, I want to build this for myself, you can wait until that idea reaches that critical mass, and then NetSuite builds that functionality into the system, and it goes to everybody. So it's a question you have to ask your organization. Do we want to take on this role, or do we want to have a partner that can do that for us? Because none of these answers are wrong. We've recommended all of those software packages that I just rattled off for various reasons, many of them being the functional fit. So, which is also the most important component of all of this. It doesn't matter if you can handle the weight or not, if the software doesn't do what you need it to, but there are ways of getting to the bottom on what it is that might feel like.
Yeah. Great points. And just as a segue into a comment from Matthew on LinkedIn, he says, "Hey, Eric, Matt Frasick from NetSuite here. I've learned a lot about ERP from listening to your videos and how they compare to the software I provide. Thank you for your content." So thank you for being here, Matthew. And of course, if you have anyone, not just Matt from NetSuite, but anyone on the live stream here today that has comments, or if you disagree with anything we're saying, or you have anything to add, please drop it in the chat. We'd love to hear your feedback. Even though we're not affiliated with software vendors, we're wholly independent and technology agnostic. We understand that a lot of people on the call here are aligned with software vendors, and they may have a different perspective. So we'd love to hear your feedback here. But you started talking about NetSuite, and sort of in keeping with this theme of, do we go with a more rigid off-the-shelf system, or do we do something custom, or do we do something in the middle, sort of a hybrid? Another sort of hybrid option that made me think of this is when you talked about NetSuite. I know NetSuite is starting to do more of what like Salesforce has done, where they've created more of an app, like a third-party app exchange, where third-party developers can create different apps and different systems that sort of are part of that platform, part of that NetSuite platform, or part of the Salesforce or Force platform. For just as a side note, for anyone who may think of Salesforce as just a CRM system, they actually have their own platform that they've developed as well, which allows third-party developers to create other extensions to Salesforce and create more manufacturing ERP types capabilities or more financial capabilities, whatever the case may be. So you have other options to sort of piece together an enterprise-wide solution within the ecosystem. So that's another hybrid option or a hybrid approach that some vendors are taking, like Salesforce. I think NetSuite's starting to do that a little bit more. Have you seen our clients benefit from that, or sort of what have you seen in the market
Yeah.
as what our clients are doing?
I think that from the NetSuite, that made for NetSuite environment is really starting to expand quite a lot, and it continues to grow. It's been out there for a long time. I mean, NetSuite is the original cloud product, right?
Right.
So there's a lot to be said for that. But I think from a perspective of that made for NetSuite environment and that next outer circle, I think that's a really dynamic model where you get a lot of options as far as like the app store, if you will, and you get a lot of chances to grow your package, right? So if NetSuite for whatever reason doesn't fit a specific type of requirement for you, you have a very niche need in one space or another, that made for NetSuite network really comes into play, where I've seen them compete really well in some of the areas like advanced demand planning and advanced manufacturing. That it seems like the M4s, the Epicors, the Oracle ERP Cloud package approach is more to have a specific in-house built advanced module. NetSuite goes to their network, and I think that that's really kind of a neat opportunity for a lot of companies to have more options as opposed to just the one advanced module. On the flip side, it does make you more beholden to more companies, right? It's made for NetSuite is not NetSuite. That can't be more clear. And the more made for NetSuite add-ons you have, the more you start to feel like you're building a disparate best of breed environment that's tied together. They're all using a common language, which solves one of the major challenges of development and integration on the whole. But you still have multiple partners with multiple different approaches and multiple different tactics for deployment. Those types of things that can be a bit overwhelming if you really start to add on too much.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. In fact, one of our current expert witness engagements addresses that exact fact. So we're often hired not only to help clients select software, not only help them implement software, but we're also hired by lawyers to be expert witnesses to testify in cases or lawsuits involving ERP systems. And one of them does involve NetSuite and one of its not one of its partners, but one of its third-party systems. And there's a lot of controversy in that case over, was it NetSuite? Was it not? Should the implementer have understood this third-party solution because it was built on NetSuite? A lot of questions that are still unresolved and unanswered in that case. And I think it's a really good point, because I think a lot of organizations do struggle with that, especially not just in this situation where you've got, say, a NetSuite or a Salesforce that has these third-party developers creating apps, but also just the vendor themselves that goes out and acquires these other systems. Like we talked about SAP and how they acquired SuccessFactors and Ariba on the procurement side. There's a lot of SAP as a whole, the ecosystem of SAP doesn't understand, or they're not as expert level in those third-party solutions as they are the core S/4HANA solution in general. That's a broad generalization, but in general, they're not.
Mhm.
And that creates a lot of difficulty during implementation, because finding the right resources and creating that truly integrated solution becomes a little bit more difficult when you start talking about either third-party bolt-ons or add-ons or that best-of-breed model.
Well, it's all about how many cooks do you have in the kitchen, right? And
Yeah.
and who's the master chef, right? The master chef should be you in all those circumstances. But then that way you have an opportunity to make sure that everything's blending together appropriately. And that's not just a NetSuite challenge. Don't want our NetSuiters to feel like I'm beating them up for something that applies to everybody else. It's a challenge for everybody. And when you have a software vendor and you have a system integrator, and then you have integrated bolt-ons that just complicate the scenario, getting all of those things to go live at the same time becomes more and more complex the more you pour into it.
Yeah. Very, very well said. Shifting gears a little bit, one vendor we have not talked about yet. We talked about NetSuite, which is owned by Oracle, but we have not yet talked about Oracle Cloud ERP. And Avi, that's the name I completely butchered a few minutes ago, but he corrected me and said you can just call me Avi. So thank you for making my life easier and for not allowing me to butcher your name again. But Avi from LinkedIn says, how would you rate Oracle Cloud ERP for manufacturing industries? And this is you and I have had this conversation before about some of our manufacturing clients that have considered and in some cases implemented Oracle. But just generally speaking, what are your thoughts around Oracle Cloud ERP for manufacturers?
Yeah, it's a highly dynamic platform, and it grows every day. At the end of the day, Oracle has such an amazing wealth of experience and access from a research and development perspective, and they continue to grow every day, right? And that's something that I think is really an important piece of the puzzle here, because again, when you start talking about migrating from one place from one more or we'll call it less modern ERP to something that is more modern, especially cloud-based. There's a focus at Oracle on building that ERP cloud product and making it work for everybody. And Oracle has some of the most dynamic experience across the software industry and resources to draw on, largely because they've of that acquisition-based model of the past that they've been so heavy into. It's JD Edwards, we still find people that are, and it's not once in a blue moon. Like we still find people that are enamored with and just fanatics about JD Edwards and the manufacturing functionality that's inherent in that. And, that's not to say that you get the same system in Oracle ERP Cloud, but you do have those resources that translate in-house. And you see a lot of that knowledge transfer from software to software when you start having people grow within the industry. So Oracle ERP Cloud, a very, very dynamic product. I would say that it's just as well versed in manufacturing as SAP. It's just a matter of exactly how they match up with your requirements on a one-to-one basis.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned JD Edwards, and I totally agree with what you're saying about JD Edwards, which is there are a lot of JD Edwards fanatics and diehards out there. Just like there was with, IBM AS400 and iSeries, they're not as common now as they were 10 or 20 years ago, but for a long time you had people that were just diehard mainframe enthusiasts because it was so stable and it just gave you certain benefits that newer technology didn't. And same with JD Edwards. It was so focused on manufacturing. They happen to be based here in Denver, where Third Stage is based. That's where JD Edwards started. And so we know a lot of people in that ecosystem just based on proximity. But I think it's worth bringing it up, though, because a lot of these legacy systems like JD Edwards, which is a great example, was built for manufacturing, used by a lot of manufacturers for decades. And then you expect an organization to move from JD Edwards now to Oracle Cloud ERP, and you lose some stuff there. The Oracle Cloud ERP is just not JD Edwards. It hasn't been around as long. It's not as focused as JD Edwards was in the manufacturing space. So you're just going to lose a certain amount of functionality. And even Oracle EBS, the e-business suite, which is the predecessor to Cloud ERP, there's generally more manufacturing capability in that solution just because it had the benefit of being around for longer. And eventually this will become a moot point as Oracle Cloud and some of these other vendors get caught up with their cloud solutions and it becomes as mature as their old on-premise systems. But in the meantime, that transition becomes difficult for a lot of organizations. Like the diehard JDE enthusiasts, it's highly likely they're going to be disappointed in Oracle Cloud ERP, not because it's a bad solution, because it's not JD Edwards. Is that something you see with not just the Oracle customers, but others as well?
That's funny because I had a client who was dead set on, look, we just want to buy more JDE. How do I do that?
Right.
That's all I want is I want more JDE. How do I do that? It's like it's definitely difficult. It's not unheard of. I had a client go through a JDE implementation as recent as the last couple of years. But at the same time, it's there are other software packages out there that feel a bit more modern. And I would say that to completely not answer your question at all, I would say
Nice
that
job, by the way.
to go from an EBS, for example, to an Oracle ERP cloud, you're going to have gaps because there's just not as much time to transition that functionality. I would also say that the manufacturing industry, for example, continues to evolve as well. So some of the needs of the past start to become less important. So it's not like you need to migrate 100% of what EBS or JDE does, because some of those things become obsolete. So there's a balance there, and kind of seeing where the modern software surpasses the more established software packages, and that's something that's just going to kind of take time as an industry to get past. And when you start thinking about the idea of, can I get the same manufacturing functionality if I move from JDE or from software A to more modern version of software A, or A.2, whatever you want to call it? The answer is really technically not really, but that's where change management becomes important, right? You don't necessarily need it to work exactly the way it always has in all cases. You just need to know where it needs to work exactly the same way as it always had in very specific scenarios that are critical to your business.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Makes a ton of sense. A couple of comments here that I wanted just to point out here. Apparently, we hit a nerve with this the custom development discussion. That always makes for interesting conversation. But AV over on LinkedIn, who, by the way, his firm is also in the Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies in America. So congratulations to him as well as third stage for being on that list. But AV says, Kyler, talking about custom ERP is making me nervous. So we've made at least one person nervous. We've triggered at least one person on this conversation. And then Kyler commented that it is indeed a trigger. But I did want to share this comment from Sam Graham, who by the way, I'm determined to have Sam on this show someday. He's declined my request so far, but I'm gonna keep trying until he's on this show because he always has such good comments. But Sam says one large pharma company wrote their own ERP system. They invested 600 man years in it. By the time it was finished, the company changed direction and the new system didn't fit its needs. It never went live. So interesting case study, data point, anecdotal, of course, but it is a good example of the risk of doing a custom solution is that it's going to take you a long time. It's going to be pretty expensive, and you better be pretty clear on what your business model is and what your future direction is, because if you change course, the flexibility that you miss out on by having a custom solution can be a problem. I think of an example of where custom might make sense, though a custom developed solution would be like you think of like DoorDash or Grubhub or one of the delivery services, or Uber, the car sharing service. So you think about business models that are built on an entirely new technology. Those might be rare instances where custom development does make sense. But if you're a manufacturer or a consumer product company, chances are highly likely that you're going to find 60, 70, 80% of what you need in some sort of custom solution or some sort of off-the-shelf solution. And you can always just fill the gaps with point custom solutions rather than trying to build it all from scratch. So I don't want to beat a dead horse, but that was seemed to be a common thread here in the comments in the chat.
I think there's now to make people nervous for a little bit longer. I think that custom development is something that you shouldn't entirely rule out, right? Cloud packages, especially multi-tenant platforms, are designed to eliminate customization, which means it eliminates options, right? You are stuck with what you get. And it's the same for everybody. That's how a multi-tenant platform works. Now, there are lots of folks that will tell you, well, yeah, well, you can do this or you can do that, but it's still within the same boundaries, right? These software systems are growing quite a lot more configurable. But if you need a very specific solution, custom code can do you a lot of favors. Now, that being said, custom code also makes me nervous because
Right.
you have to maintain it, and that becomes your problem. And then you have to maintain all the endpoints, and one customization begets another, so it has a bit of a snowball effect. But it does have a place, and your job is to figure out whether or not that place is appropriate for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes total sense. Here's a question from Satyam on YouTube, and he says, "Would love to hear how to independently do ERP comparisons on detailed at the detailed process level in order to know which ERP platforms or in order to know which ERP performs any given operation best." So maybe just in general, without we could spend the whole hour talking about just how to evaluate potential systems, but just at a high level, what are some of the ways you can independently and agnostically evaluate the options that are available in the marketplace?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and to narrow it down to something that's too narrow to really have a lot of usefulness as far as the process is concerned. But what you're going to focus on is the software requirements that make it different for you. You want to get to a detailed level of requirements, and then know which ones of your requirements are going to drive a differentiation. You can bring in a partner to help with that, and say these ones are this, these ones fit this one, these ones fit those ones, or you can ask the vendors directly themselves. How do you fit these specific requirements? The key again is that comment that you made, that you want to get the vast majority of your functionality out of the box, especially for the things that don't matter, right? When shipping is confirmed, it sends an invoice. That's boom, boom. That's not something that you should use as a differentiator on your software because everybody does it. But when you have more complex needs that are more unique to your competitive advantage in the marketplace, getting nitty gritty on those solutions and what it is one software package does versus the other is really the key to finding the right package for you. And then the rest of it just becomes a change management challenge. Knowing the difference between why it has to be that way and why it can't be different, versus what's good change management protocol is really the key in figuring out how you know which software package meets your most specific, unique, and complex needs. So focus on those things from a perspective of if you're going to go out there and try to figure it out, focus on what makes a difference to your business and what makes you unique, and then get there.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm just augmenting what you're saying with some text or with a comment here from Kyler, who is part of the third stage team. And her comment here is it's a balance. That's why having an expert on your side and only your side is so important. And that is just as a shameless plug here, that is the value the third stage provides is that we are independent. We are not paid by software vendors. We make absolutely no money off any sort of recommendation, which is what makes us unique and which is why so many clients hire us to help figure out what technology fits best. We also have a database, a proprietary database and tool that we use to plug in some of those higher priority requirements that you're talking about, Adam, that helps us quantify and objectively quantify the differences in the strengths and weaknesses of different solutions against different requirements and different functions, so that independent agnostic or technology agnostic angle as well as the tool set to help with the selection are two things that are very important. What about this? Speaking of Kyler, this is another question. Who, by the way, just fun fact, Kyler is Adam's wife and is our marketing director and also my podcast co-host. So it's a very small world we're living in here. But Kyler says, what should organizations do if their system is being sunsetted? Which seems to be a common thing lately. And in fact, speaking of triggers, you have probably written the most controversial and triggering blog on your website, which is talking about Microsoft Great Plains and the sunsetting of Microsoft Great Plains. And the Microsoft community does not like the fact that we are talking about that. So let's talk about it some more.
let's be fair. Everybody sunsets a software package.
Yes, not just
Microsoft. Microsoft just seems to be pretty sensitive about it.
Yeah.
At least the system integrator industry is concerned. So if you find yourself in a position where your software package is being sunsetted, the first thing I would do is check the facts. Right, system integrators will often tell you tell you two things that are not always true. One, your software package is being sunsetted. You'll never get support for that ever again. And two, migrating to the newest, greatest version of that software package is just an upgrade. It's easy. we'll use the Microsoft Great Plains example again. Microsoft has, since they made that announcement, walked that back, and from there, we've had a lot of conversations with companies about what that means. But the two things that are important to remember there is, even when Microsoft Great Plains sunsets, another industry will pop up to support it, right? It won't be Microsoft supporting it, but there will be people out there who will help you support that tool. So it's not an immediate, oh no, it's I've got to get off this software, because an industry the need will present itself to the market, and the market will fill the gap, right? Especially with a product like Microsoft Great Plains. One of the more, I'd say that JDE is probably one of the software packages that's more fanatical from its support and use perspective than Great Plains is. But the other side of this is the most important to remember, is that migrating from a package like Great Plains to Microsoft Dynamics 365 Finance and Supply Chain this is migrating from a traditional accounting package to that people built in manufacturing functionality to a brand new something else. It won't be easier to migrate to Dynamics 365's finance and supply chain just because it's Microsoft. It may actually, for you, depending on your needs as a company, be easier to migrate to an Infor or an Epicor, which are two software packages that we find are real good contenders in the space as well, that need to be considered. Because from an Infor perspective, they kind of compete in both these packages compete in that upper tier 2 space. I'd say Infor feels like it competes at a little bit higher level than Epicor. But at the same time, when you're talking about moving off of something that's kind of a Windows-based ERP package that was mostly made for accounting back in the day, because I think, if I remember right, Microsoft Great Plains used to be Peachtree. I might have that mixed up, though. So if anybody in the audience knows, would certainly could use a correction if there is one. But it's, at the end of the day, going to a new package is a new package, whether or not the logo on it is the same. The parts aren't reusable when you start talking about that type of a change. So consider all of your options, because in that environment, you may find that an Infor or an Epicor brings a lot more manufacturing functionality than you ever thought an ERP package could, because they're focused on that.
Yeah.
Whereas Great Plains really wasn't when it was built.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And Gassan on LinkedIn has a good comment, a good analogy here, or metaphor. When one ERP sunsets, another ERP sunrises. And the one that at high noon can cause a serious sunburn. so don't get sunburned, or put on your sunblock, I suppose, is the best advice we could give you there as it relates to ERP.
Is that another analogy or metaphor for third stage now? We are sunblock.
That's actually, you're onto something there. We do have our marketing team on this on this live stream, so we're just giving them.
Listening.
I hope they're listening, because we are full of good ideas today. We've got it all figured out here. So we covered Infor and Epicor. That was actually a question from Kyler as well. You beat her to the punch on addressing that. But what about, I'm going to pick a couple other vendors that are in our top 10 most recommended systems list, as well as in our top 10 general ranking of sort of best features and functionality in the market. But another one we have not talked about yet is IFS. Maybe tell us a little about IFS and where does that fit?
IFS is an interesting software package, because it kind of is it's kind of a bit disruptive to the industry, in that it doesn't play the game the way that the other vendors do, right? I have seen IFS compete side by side against SAP S/4HANA and beat them hands down, and not close. It's something that is designed for highly complex manufacturing, and that's what they do. That's what they focus on. They do have a good field service package as well, from a field service management perspective, but they are very focused on that complexity, especially when you're talking about manufacturing. Complexity creates challenges in and of itself, and IFS's challenge becomes, if you can't pull it off, what do you do? Whereas if you have more of an SAP Oracle, you have more options. If you can't pull it off, you can fire your system integrator and bring in another one. There's a bit more of an industry around that. And I see Gassan bringing up IFS. And interesting for some, is that the acronym? Is that what that stands for?
I saw that too. I was just about to pull it up, but I didn't want to distract
So,
you.
but it is a very complex package that can do quite a lot of things. And we find that from a traceability perspective, it's very, very strong, especially when we're talking about aerospace and those types of industries. The flip side of it is, if you don't need that complexity, you'll be in over your head pretty quick. I think in these days too, when you mention IFS, you had to mention Acumatica. They are owned by the same company. I think it was 3 years ago. I forget the name of the private equity firm that bought both, but they bought them both pretty close together as a private equity firm that seems to be targeting an ERP model. And IFS has a corner of this of the market that it's very secure in. And Acumatica is also a great product that we've recommended a few times and implemented, that is also an interesting disruption to the industry. They are entirely cloud-based on the Acumatica side of things, and they do really, really well with products that are high margin, low volume, because their pricing model is different. It's their disruption to the industry is, we don't pay based on user licenses. You pay based on transactional volume, which is an interesting, and it does make sense to me, from a certain perspective, to charge for how many bytes go through the pipe, right? And that's where Acumatica plays really well. I've seen them outcompete folks from a functionality perspective, but lose because they're just, that volume becomes a price sensitive conversation, where if you're high volume, low margin, it's just difficult to support an Acumatica type of system.
Right. Yeah, that's a good one. That is actually something I was going to ask. Is Acumatica is another one that was in our top 10 list, most recommended systems list. Let me get to some audience questions before we wrap up here. I have to share this comment, partly to keep my own ego in check. This is from Allie. This is from Allie on YouTube, who says, "You make our life miserable. Our university instructor assigns us to watch some of your videos and quizzed." I think he means quizzes us. I would say you're welcome, but it sounds like that's not a good thing in your opinion. But I hope you do learn something from this and other videos that you watch.
And if you have questions, feel free to reach out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if there's something that doesn't make sense on the YouTube channel that you don't like, I love feedback. So any feedback you share is good stuff. And then Gassan on LinkedIn, continuing with the the sun theme, which kind of fits the third stage rocket theme. And again, just more brilliant ideas for our marketing team. We had an eclipse today, but I didn't notice any changes in my shadow intensity. So I'm having trouble drawing a connection there with taking that analogy to where he's going there, but it just thought I'd share that comment there. What about one other system I wanted to ask you about, Adam, is DCOM. That's one that was just outside. It was either just outside or at the lower side of our top 10 most recommended systems. But it is one that, sort of like IFS, interesting for some, as Gassan said, which I think is actually a good analogy, even though I think he's being funny. But I think it makes sense, because IFS isn't a great fit for a lot of people. But where it is a good fit, it's a really good fit. And they tend to be very focused. Yeah. And DCOM's another one that strikes me as a pretty focused vendor. What are your thoughts on DCOM?
Yeah, very focused for sure. DCOM is, I think what will be most interesting about DCOM is to see what happens within the next 3 to 5 years, because founded by a gentleman who grew it as a family business, grew it himself and built it up. And it's a very, very good package for things like agriculture and process manufacturing, particularly. That's where we see it compete the strongest, because process manufacturing is just a different animal when you start talking about things like units of measure and things like food and beverage. It does kind of get outpaced when the business gets large. So DCOM has I've seen them struggle to fit for larger software companies that start to graduate into the more upper tier two, tier one space. But they're definitely a consideration. They got strong functionality and a great backing. But they were recently acquired, and I would say that just like any business that is homegrown and by a founder that was his entire vision, and having somebody else buy that, you start to wonder what the roadmap and the vision, how do those change, and what could that look like? Because at the end of the day, the functionality is there, and it's definitely a strong model, and you get really um, a good relationship from DCOM. But I'll be interested to see how they turn out now that they've been acquired, because that can be a pretty dramatic change for a company.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And especially when they've had such a distinct niche and a distinct focus, you wonder, will they
Yeah.
preserve that focus? And you kind of get into the whole vendor viability discussion too. That's something you have to think about
Mhm.
as you consider software solutions. You're not just buying a solution, you're buying into a vendor, their long-term roadmap, their R&D, the strengths and weaknesses of all that. So I think that's an important point you bring up is you can't predict the future with 100% certainty, but all things being equal, you might look at the vendor roadmap as sort of the vendor viability and roadmap as a sort of a tiebreaker if you need to.
Mhm. What is and you can kind of read into that, because I like the idea of comparing the acquisitional models of we've talked about a couple of them. You have SAP that's gobbling up smaller packages. You have the private equity firm that bought IFS and Acumatica. You have the Coke acquisition of Infor. You have the DCOM acquisition there, and that all comes together for me to start thinking about what's going on here. We've seen the Coke acquisition do great things for Infor, but it takes time for a company like that to impart its wisdom on the rest of the organization. I would say that I think it's EQT Partners or something like that that bought IFS and Acumatica. The fact that they bought them both so close together leads me to think that this is a private equity firm that isn't just interested in fix and flip, right? They're looking to corner a market, and they're looking to cash in on it. The decom side of things is difficult to shake out a little bit more. That seems like it could be more in the fix and flip scenario, just because of the nature of what decom does and how it fits into the industry. So all of those things are good comparisons to thinking about what it is that means for your product long term, right? SAP obviously committed to its own software package. Coke obviously committed to the software as well. They're pouring a lot into that. Same with the firm that bought IFS and Acumatica. Decom, I would certainly ask the questions. What does it look like if I buy your software and you decide to flip this company in the middle of my implementation?
Yeah, yeah. There's very, very important points because you have to think longer term about implementation, support, ongoing maintenance, all that good stuff. So I guess just to summarize, we could spend another hour or two or three on this topic. So we'll in the interest of time, wrap it up here. But just as a sort of a concluding thought, what if I'm an organization that is trying to figure out which of these systems are best for me? Obviously, I don't have the time and resources to go do a deep dive into all these different systems we've talked about. But how do I get started? What are some sort of takeaways you could leave with project teams that are about to go through an evaluation process? What are some of the quick hit sorts of things you can recommend to get us started?
Yeah, if we're talking about looking at what we've got here, I would say first understand what space you fit in, right? Are you a small company that's just graduating off QuickBooks? And what does that mean to you? Because if that's the case, you may end up in a more niche based tier three product that could fit your needs very well. If you're a tier two, there's a certain set of software packages that fit there. And if you're a tier one, you're looking at Oracle, SAP, Microsoft, with some considerations as to whether or not M4 can accommodate you, or IFS can as well. Those I'd think about it that way. Know what size fits you best, and then start with that. From there, start thinking about the requirements. That's really the key. Once you know which space you fit, what size you're going to wear here, start figuring out what your requirements are and what makes you unique and complex.
Yeah. And really focusing on those differentiating requirements. And it's, maybe your top 10, 20% of your requirements that you really hone in on and use that as the big differentiation
Yep.
evaluation factor for sure. Well, good. Well, I appreciate you being on the show here, Adam, to share some of your insights and sort of what we're seeing on the front lines with clients that are going through evaluations and preparation for 2023. For those of you that are interested in learning more, I encourage you to go to our website. If you haven't yet, download the 2023 Digital Transformation Report. If you go to thirdstage-consulting.com, go to the Resource Center, I think the first thing you'll see is the 2023 Digital Transformation Report. The reason I bring that up, or the reason I suggest that, is a takeaway from today's discussion is because we have a ton of independent reviews and rankings of different systems and different functions within that report, as well as other general best practices and lessons and tips and things for digital transformation. So it looks like Kyler is already on it, and she's dropping the link to that in the chat. So if you just check the stream here, look for Kyler or Third Stage's name, and they're dropping the links in the chat as we speak. But be sure to download that report. It's going to give you a lot of intel on vendors we've talked about here today, but there's a lot we haven't talked about. I mean, we didn't get a chance to talk about Sage or SysPro, Tyler Munis, even QuickBooks. I mean, QuickBooks is still being used by a lot of smaller organizations. A lot of vendors we didn't talk about, but are still could be very relevant, could be great fits. So in the interest of time, we couldn't get to it all, but download that report, and I think you'll get some more intel. And of course, check out our YouTube channels. We've got tons of reviews on both my personal both my personal YouTube channel as well as Third Stage's corporate YouTube channel. So be sure to check that out as well. So thank you.
A lot of the answers to the quiz are in the report itself.
Right. Yes. For Ali on YouTube, who is miserable and has to watch my videos. Again, you're welcome, but also be sure to check that out because it'll have all the answers in there. And I'm sure your professor has read that report, so you might want to check that out. But thank you everyone for being here today. Great participation from the audience. Thank you. And if you have questions about software selection or how to get started on digital transformation, of course, you can reach out to either Adam or I at any point. So you can find us on LinkedIn. And as I mentioned before, this live stream is something we do every Tuesday, same time, same place. It actually also becomes the centerpiece or the cornerstone interview for my Transformation Ground Control podcast, which comes out every Wednesday. So the episode that will feature this interview will be a week from tomorrow, Wednesday of next week. So be sure to check that out as well. You can find the Transformation Ground Control podcast on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, as well as all the audio podcast platforms as well. So be sure to check that out. So thank you everyone for joining. Hope you have a great week, and we'll look forward to seeing you in our future live streams. Take care. Have a great day.